Players.
Players.
Player's own.
Player's own.
Player's own voice.
Player's own voice.
It's Player's Own Voice, a podcast from CBC Sports. My name is Anastasia Bucsis, and I am a two-time Olympian that has struggled greatly with my mental health. Today, I am joined by a rare athlete whose career, post-competition, has touched as many lives as her so-called glory days. Silken Laumann hardly needs an introduction. Her rowing career is one for the ages, but since then, she has written, coached, mentored, and advocated prolifically. A healthier approach to sports is part of her mission, and her ideas and writing about her experiences with mental illness is part of her lasting contribution to Canadian society. Our conversation about mental health is not perfect, but it is vulnerable and it is honest. Everyone's experiences are different, and if you are struggling with your mental health, please know that you are not alone and that there are resources to get help. Three-time Olympic medalist, a million-time world champion. You've got a star on Canada's Walk of Fame. Is that not crazy?
That's a little crazy.
It's just up the street. I think we should go take a selfie with it.
Yeah. It's a rower, of all things, is on the Walk of Fame.
Rowing is hard. And you are one of Canada's most celebrated Olympians of all time. It is my great pleasure to be sitting down with Silken Laumann. How are you doing?
Thank you. Just awesome.
Well, when did you retire? It's got to be at least 20 years ago.
A long time ago. My last Olympics was 1996, so, do the math about 22 years ago.
You're still more fit than I am, so you're showing me up.
I doubt that, but yeah, fitness and being healthy has actually been kind of a lifelong and pretty meaningful journey for me. It's something that I put up there with a top value in my life, just feeling good and being physically strong is part of that.
Right after you retired, did you just continue to be physically fit and active? Because this is I've been retired for just less than 18 months now, and I've eaten a lot of chicken wings. And I'm not competitive and
Well, there definitely is that sort of backlash, I think, that athletes have from being so disciplined and so programmed where they can really fall off the rails. And, the challenge with that is detraining is really important. Mm-hmm. And, for me, I retired in 1996 and I was pregnant 6 weeks later.
Wow.
So that was a total change, probably not the ideal way to do it. But when you don't detrain, a lot of difficult things can happen. You got all that blood volume going through your system. You're more prone to strokes and, heart disease and stuff that you wouldn't even imagine. But I think psychologically too. I think athletes have such a high need for physicality and for that physical outlet. And when you stop it, you can take all that intensity and start to turn it inward.
I want to personally thank you, of course, just for your work that you've done in furthering the conversation around mental health. Why is it so hard for athletes to talk about mental health and mental well-being?
Athletes are tough. Mm-hmm. You gotta be tough to push your body to that limit. And when you're an athlete, you have to perform on the day no matter what. No excuses. Doesn't matter what's happening in your life. Your mentality is push through it and make it happen. And that's a mentality you've lived with since you were 4, 8, 10 years old. And so then suddenly, you start having mental health challenges or challenges in your life, and it's so against the way you've been trained to push on and push through and be tough. So the two things seem sort of polarly opposite. The idea of being vulnerable, opening ourselves up, looking at our stuff. Of course, the fear is you're going to just fall into this pit and not be able to get out and be that tough gnarly human that you have to be in order to speed skate with the best in the world or row with the best in the world.
When I was really struggling with anxiety and depression, I was so incredibly miserable. You know, my years between Vancouver and Sochi, very alarming, unhealthy thoughts of suicide, to be honest. And I don't open up and talk about that still to this day. But my darkest days led to some of my best races as well, because of that loneliness and energy, although toxic. I couldn't transfer it, and I couldn't transfer it into races all the time, but when I did, there were little bits of magic.
Interesting. You know, I was not aware of my mental health challenges when I was competing. It's been 22 years since I competed internationally, and a lot has changed. And just awareness, like I could have been in the middle of, and I think I was, of some real mental health challenges, but didn't recognize it as that. I just thought something was wrong with me, and that, you know, I was a person that had these terribly dark thoughts. I think energy can be used in all sorts of different ways. And sometimes we do channel that intensity and that negative energy in a way that can perform and create an extraordinary result. But the thing is, like, it's unsustainable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's sort of like a lot of the things that help us early in life. So, you know, it's no coincidence that many people who've had childhood trauma also end up becoming really high achievers. So in a way that they've learned to survive early on, they've learned coping mechanisms, they've learned to be tough and tenacious and all those things. But at some point in our lives, just being tough and tenacious doesn't work anymore. And like for me, it was the point in my life when I had kids. And I had like a 2 and a 4-year-old, and anybody who has a 2 and 4-year-old knows it is like a non-stop pull kind of job. And if you have issues, they're going to come up when you start parenting.
I'm not a parent, but thank you for being so candid with that. Absolutely.
Parenting is this sort of window into sort of who you are and what your values are and what you believe. For me, that was the window for finally getting help. So it could be a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And I think now, you know, there's so much more awareness around mental health that maybe, you know, athletes will be better about getting that help earlier. Saying that, our NSOs, our organizations still have very old thinking.
Yeah, they do.
And, you know, sometimes a lack of professionalism in leadership, lots of issues, lots of problems. And I don't think in sport, although we have sports psychologists, we're not really on the forefront of mental health. And when actually a mental health issue emerges, a lot of time there's not a plan of how you deal with an athlete who has a mental health issue.
Well, it's not like breaking a leg, or it's not like physiotherapy and rehab. It's oftentimes very invisible.
It's very invisible. And like you were saying, you know, when you were struggling in the peak of your career, you know, you channeled that energy, and it sometimes helped you perform really well. So, of course, the fear is for athletes, if they get better, if they have a better and different mindset, is it going to affect them in a negative way?
Yeah. I remember talking to Clara in 2014, and she, of course, knew everything that I had been going through. And she knew that I was taking a year off after 2014, the Sochi Olympic Games, because I said, listen, like, I am completely burnt out. I'm overtrained. I'm depressed. I had gone on a little bit of medication, and it unfortunately didn't really help, because then I couldn't even get up to really compete in a race. You know, it's like you're a thoroughbred, and when I couldn't get to that 6th gear.
Being an athlete, in a way, you're having to be superhuman. You're having to find a gear that isn't always there naturally. You have to, you know, athletes often are very edgy. They have an edge. They have sharpness to them. They're highly competitive humans, right? And I certainly remember when I first started therapy, and it was after I competed. One of the things I was most afraid of was would I lose my edge? Would I lose the very thing that made me ambitious in everything that I did? Right? And I mean, I kind of like that part of me. It had helped me so much in my life.
It's funny, actually. Ben Hebert, Total Beauty, he's a curler. He said, I don't want to have too much perspective. He was like, I never want to not take things seriously enough, in the sense that I will think, oh, if I lose this match, life goes on, which is a very healthy way to think. But he goes, there's moments where you can't think like that. You got to think this is life and death, and you're putting it all on the line. And when I started to go through therapy and really work on the self-love that I completely lacked, I did get a little bit of perspective in that sense, which was healthy for my well-being and my entirety of my life. But I don't know if I ever really truly approached a race to that, like, if I don't skate well, I'm a bad person. You know what I mean? Which is healthy. But it's bizarre when I can finally admit there were times in my darkest days where it really did drive some of my competitiveness.
So many people are driven by negatives, right?
Yeah.
Like, I need to achieve in order to be loved. I need to achieve to prove my worth. I need to give. I need to contribute. I need to do more than the person next to me so that somehow I prove to, and it's always yourself, that you're worthy. And when I reached a place in my life where I could see that I was worthy of love, that I was enough, simply because I was born, it was the starting point of love and self-love and acceptance. And what I found is that it created capacity. So the thing that I'd been carrying, the guilt, the shame, the story I'd never told, when I finally dropped that, it was like, whoa, like the creative energy, the ability to make decisions that were so right on in my life, because I didn't have all of these negative voices and doubts and everything. So I just know what the right decision is, what the next best move is for my life, because I'm so connected to who I really am. And a lot of the angst of those early professional careers, and even as a parent, you know, am I doing the right thing? Am I screwing up my kids? Of course I'm screwing up my kids. Like, we're all going to screw up our kids to a certain degree, right? But am I doing, like, when you've got that place where you really, really can stand up and say, you know what? I'm worth it. I have value. And it has nothing to do with how many medals I have, or how tough I am, or, you know, how much I care about other people. It just is. The same way, like when my kids were born, I just loved them. They had worth immediately.
You did not have that perspective when you were rowing.
No.
When you won 3 Olympic medals, how long did that afterglow last for before you went, oh my God, like I'm still
It doesn't last long.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter how many medals you weigh. I mean, you know, my ex-husband said to me after he won a gold medal in rowing, you know, he woke up the next morning and thought, well, what's next?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what if the greatest moment of my life is over?
Yeah.
And I think that the success of an Olympic medal, I mean, yeah, it might have been a lifetime dream, and it's amazing when you finally realize it. But I mean, it's really amazing when you realize a dream, when you know who you are and you love that person. And maybe it's not possible when you're 22. Like, you know, like a lot of the Olympic athletes, when they're winning medals, are 22 and 24. And maybe like self-awareness and wisdom and self-love just doesn't come as easily when you're that age.
I know. It certainly didn't for me. Yeah, when you realize a dream, you have a little bit of an existential crisis.
Yeah. Yeah, because you see, the dream has been your reason. It has been like what everything else has been built around. And in a way, you haven't had to think past that dream, because that dream has been so all-consuming. And as you move towards an Olympic Games, your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you literally have tunnel vision. And I was super great at having tunnel vision. And then you reach the goal, and there are those questions of, like, what's next? Well, I got pregnant 6 weeks after the Olympic Games. That's what was next for me. And I was still speaking and doing a lot of the other things that I'm doing. And I was really lucky in a way that I'd had multiple times in my career where I had injuries so severe that it threatened to take me out permanently. And so I had actually given a fair bit of thought to, like, kind of what's next. And I was also very fortunate that a lot of things that I love to do were speaking and writing and communicating. And there was kind of a natural segue for me to take my experiences in sport and create a platform to talk about life and challenge and, inner fortitude and all of these things that I've spent the last 30 years speaking about now, increasingly about mental health and, wellness and, how we as human beings, like, actually live our lives to our full potential. And to me, there's a physical piece, which is that you got to be physically well to be at your best. Like, it just can't happen otherwise. And then there's mental piece, which is, like, you also have to be aware of who you are and what your limitations are and, and who you are as a human. And for me, there's also a spiritual connection, which is that, like, I do yoga and meditation and pranayama and all sorts of different strategies to continually connect to my soul. And all of those three things to me are a big part of how I bring my best person forward, how I have the capacity to raise 4 children and to mentor lots of other young people. I feel like the capacity comes from dropping that 70-kilo bag I was carrying for so much of my life and really kind of understanding who I was and not carrying shame around anymore.
In your transition out of sport, what did you learn about yourself?
It took me a while to learn, I think. I mean, I think when I first retired from sport, I just applied the intensity I had in sport to everything else that I did. So I was going to become, like, the best speaker, and I was going to become, I was going to get a great contract and execute it to 100% of my abilities, and I was going to become an amazing mother. And, like, and then I just kind of melted, and because I didn't have the little world that we live in sport, which is that everything is about sport. Suddenly I was a mom, and I was a business person, and I was a wife, and I was, like, having a normal life. But it wasn't normal at all because I was a public person, and I had those constant pressures too of being a public person in a place where I had so many multiple stresses on my life. And I just got to the point pretty quickly. So I want to say 4 years after I retired, I had, a full-out meltdown. And I guess because I knew if I didn't change, I was going to mess up my kids. That was, for me, the motivation. I was like, you know what? I don't care how hard this is going to be. And I had to go back into my past, and I had to deal with some pretty hard stuff. Understanding how growing up with a mom whose mental illness was undiagnosed and unacknowledged, and how profoundly coming home and never knowing what to expect. What am I coming home to today? And somehow, whatever it was, feeling it was my fault, that it was something I should have been able to do. I should have been able to read it. I should have been able to avoid it. And getting to the place in my life pretty early on where I completely mentally detached from my mom.
Yeah.
So I had to look at all that stuff and find the courage to keep pushing through it, even when it felt like the foundation was starting to rock.
What would you like to see change in our current Canadian sporting landscape to provide athletes tangible tools to work on their mental health, to be self-aware, to be educated about mental well-being so that others don't have to go through kind of those revelations?
Well, it's funny because we spent the first part of our conversation talking about like how, in a way our ill health at times really led to good performances, right? But I don't know if that's actually true. I think it's true.
It's maybe a narrative that I tell myself. Yeah.
Well, I think it's true in that at that moment that energy was directed, but what we could never know is how would it have been different had
Absolutely.
we been healthy at the time. And I do believe that you can have just as much ambition and intensity and vibrancy while being on a more healthy place. So I think it's almost like the same advice I'd give in our sports system. We're a lot of the time we're dealing with young people. We're dealing with 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And I think investing in wellness, right? Like making yoga part of the platform, teaching kids how to breathe, pranayama, which is a way of breathing that drives oxygen into all areas in the body and changes your physiology, lowers your heart rate, reduces the stress hormones in your body. This is real physiological change that happens when you breathe. And what are athletes? We're chest breathers, right? Yeah. So we don't even know how to breathe from the belly. So I think looking at wellness as an important part of the equation of how we get a long-term career out of our athletes. There's sometimes athletes have to see psychiatrists and they have to see really good trained counselors that have been trained in trauma. And so the idea that a sports therapist or a counselor can deal with everything is just not true. They don't have that training sometimes. And I think there's a reluctance in our sports system to go beyond and to see that maybe these problems are bigger than I'm obsessing about my competitor.
You live your dream in the pursuit of it, not when you reach it. But certainly it doesn't really matter where you end up if you're not comfortable or you're not healthy. I know many people that have won Olympic gold medals that hate themselves. And that's really when you're like, wow, like what we're doing here, as much as we obsess over competitors and results and medals and trophies and, awards, at the end of the day, it's really not about that.
No, it's not. And our sports system itself has to be healthy. It has to be built with respectful leadership. It has to be built with equitable leadership. There's a real lack of women in our leadership in sport. It doesn't reflect our population. I don't think it reflects really our values as accurately as it could. And I think if we built our sports system differently to represent more diversity and diversity of thinking as well. So our sports system has come out of a very old model.
You are incredibly passionate and active in promoting physical literacy in children. What advice would you give to parents that are raising kids in sport? How hands-on should they be?
Well, there's sport and there's play, and I think in the early days it should be almost all about play. I think that kids need the opportunity to use their imaginations, to play with kids at different age groups, to just sort of follow their interests. And the more opportunities we give kids to have physical playtime, like from the time they're little, take them away from the screens and bring them into the parks and create communities. I mean, when my kids were growing up, I created a play in the park night in our community and basically invited all the neighbors to come with their kids, and that became this big Monday night thing. And my kids today, my youngest is 18, says to me some of her best memories of being a kid was playing the park night, and just like how great it was just to go out there with, and she says things like this: Mom, I think I grew up in a really good time. Kids today might not have those kind of things, right? Yeah. And yet there was, right? But so I think in sport, we get our kids involved too early, and then it's like all or nothing. And, you're either like going to be practicing 5 times a week, or you're not going to be advancing at all. And I wish that our sports system was also more flexible on that recreational athlete. I mean, like the number of people that are actually going to become people like you and I who are going to compete at the Olympics. It's like, I don't even know what it is, but we've kind of built a system so that those people will be identified. And I think we have to build a system all around how do we get more kids physically active and healthy and enjoying sport for their whole lives. Because, of course, the story that a lot of Canadian kids talk about is, I played sport till I was 13, and then I had to choose, whether to go to the gold team or play recreational, and recreational was like super boring. And it's like these two extremes, rather than, I played sport when I was 13, and then I got to play in, a silver league, and the people were all the same ability, and I played it till I was 18, and then I became part of an adult league. And I'd like to see sport more like that, where there's sort of like this seamless movement from playing as a kid to competing to, using it competition in more recreational fashion to using it as a lifestyle. I mean, I cycle in a cycling group on Tuesday nights, and we work like super crazy hard, and I'm killing myself to hang on to the group. and that's Tuesday night, and then, I go to yoga class on Thursday mornings, and like there's a lot of things that I do in community and do in myself, and it's fun. To me, staying fit and exercising is like a license to play.
I'm not quite there yet, but I'm sure I will. I enjoy Pinot Grigio at the moment. But what is your single Streamlined key message to Canadian athletes and athletes across the world that are struggling with their mental health?
Get help. You can't do it alone. Athletes have the mentality that they should be able to overcome anything, and particularly if they're an individual sport. And they're afraid of the stigma. I think it takes enormous strength to work through a mental illness and to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is not a weakness. It is an enormous strength. And to be, whatever you're going through, it's temporary. When you're feeling joy, it's temporary. When you're feeling, despair, it's temporary. When you're feeling angst, it's temporary. And like being able to understand that no matter how badly you're struggling in this moment, there will be moments that follow this moment that will be so much more positive. But in order to experience that, you have to reach out for help, and you've got to start that mental health journey. It is going to give you so much more capacity.
Silken Laumann, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for taking the time and just chit-chatting about things that actually really, really matter. It's unbelievable how this is such a universal struggle. I think a lot of athletes struggle, and we struggle to talk about it because it's like, well, when you're going through shit, you just keep going. Like, bigger, faster, stronger, I certainly never asked for help, and I probably lost at least 2 years of true joy in a 24-year career.
Well, the reality is it costs a lot of people their careers. Yeah. And it's so avoidable. And we can do so much within our sports system to support good mental health, and within, our school system and as parents, like in every single level.
Silken Laumann, thank you so much once again. Walk on the Canadian. I'm not even saying that.
I'm going to go over there and see this star. It was a while ago.
Thank you so much just for the conversations that we all need to have.
You're very welcome. It's been very meaningful.
Sport is a lovely place, and we are all very lucky to have someone like you to take up that torch. So thank you.
Thank you.
Players Own Voice podcast, Anastasia Bucsis. Peace. I recorded that conversation with Silken in downtown Toronto, mere steps away from her spot on Canada's Walk of Fame. Players Own Voice podcast is a CBC Sports production. Email your comments to us at playersownvoicepodcast@cbc.ca. Social media, #PlayersOwnVoice. Before you go, just a reminder, if you are a fan of hockey or storytelling, then add the Hockey Night in Canada podcast to your list of must-listen-to podcasts. Rob Pizzo catches up with many of the colorful characters within the sport as they reminisce about the great moments and players of the game. It goes way beyond just the stats and scores. I'm Anastasia on Instagram and Twitter. Our producer is David Giddens, and Graham McDonald is our sound mixer. Thanks for listening.
Love CBC podcasts? Help us make them better. Take our CBC Podcast listener survey now at cbc.ca/podcasts. The quick survey will help us improve your favorite CBC podcasts. cbc.ca/podcasts.